everyone. Welcome to the Christian Health Service Corps Iron to Silver podcast. We hope this will be a resource for you. We hope it will be your source for insightful conversations with expert guests in the area of global health, patient safety, and improving quality of care in low and middle income countries. Join me, Greg Seeger, Christian Health Service Corps founder, and Dr. Sarah Pruitt and Dr. Kelly Frazier as we share stories and explore strategies to improve healthcare in low and middle income countries.
Hello and welcome back to the CHSC podcast. I am Dr. Kelly Frazier and I have Dr. Sarah Pruitt with me, and we are really honored to have two very special guests with us today, and that is Scott and Josie Gwin. They are the co-founders and directors of the Resilience resource, and we had the privilege of working with them through Samaritan's Purse at the time, and we worked together in the DRC under an Ebola response. And Sarah and I were just so impressed by these individuals that as soon as we were setting up this podcast, they were really among the top of the list of people we wanted on when it came to thinking about quality on the mission field, global health, and how to do things really well. So welcome, Scott and Josie Gwin. We're really excited to have you. And let's just start by having you tell us about your background and a little bit about the Resilience resource and introduce it to us.
Well, thanks, Kelly and Sarah, so much for having us on. It's just been a privilege to spend the time we had been able to spend with the two of you over the past couple of years. And I'm just so impressed by just the quality of your work when we first met, both of you, and just such a gift to serve alongside each other in different capacities around the world. So thank you for having us on together. And actually, the Resilience resource is just coming up on our third anniversary. We launched a couple of years ago, really seeing a gap in crisis care and resilience building tools and resources for humanitarian aid, missions workers, organizational personnel, and communities around the world that were experiencing crisis, critical incident, challenging experiences. But really, our care for traumatized people is kind of a thread that's really run through both of our lives for most of our lives, with a couple pivot points that brought things to the surface.
Yeah, I'm a preacher's kid, and my dad was a pastor for a church for the deaf in Denver. So constantly dealing with a marginalized population in that community. Josie's family started an NGO working with orphans in the Philippines, and then or kids in the Philippines in the slums, and then orphans in Romania as it transitioned, and that work is still going. So she's been in the mission / humanitarian aid for
most of my life.
I won't tell how many years, I guess.
Thank you.
So this thread has continued. It hit a climax in '99 when we lived in Southwest Denver and were part of the community where Columbine High School shooting happened, and that changed the face of trauma in so many different ways, or trauma care in so many different ways, and kind of ushered in a new normal for crisis in the United States with school shootings. And then we went into first responder. We were both firefighters. I was for 12. Josie joined me 6 years into that. So we were both firefighters, for her for 6 years and me for 12. And then we converted that had the opportunity to do some humanitarian aid and missions, and found that everything that we had put together for law enforcement and fire, for chaplaincy care and mental health care for those folks, translated almost straight across to missions and humanitarian aid personnel.
Yeah, there's just a commonality of mindset and response in the aid and missions world that's tracks very similarly to first responders. And, this the type of wiring that says, I'm willing to go into the hardest places, the places where suffering is at the forefront, and work to do the best within the skill sets that I have and the calling that God has given me to help meet the need to come alongside others in care, and often at the expense of myself, and helping to integrate that understanding that care for self, resilience in self, those different tools and resources that keep us going actually result in more compassionate and empathetic care for others, as well as keep each individual going longer, and just creates a level of sustainability that's much more robust.
Yeah, it's so great. I know that Sarah and I, when we were on the mission field, used to always say that we felt like we had more in common with military personnel than with some of the other physicians and doctors, when we came back stateside. And so we always felt like that there was a niche there for, and it's actually police officers and firefighters and kind of similar things, where you kind of come home, there's a camaraderie to talk about people from your own group, but yet it's kind of hard to talk about with people who haven't experienced what you just experienced. So it's amazing to hear more of your all's background. A lot of that I did not even know. It's just that it sounds like that God really prepared you all to be doing exactly what you're doing right now. So it's really great.
Yeah, we certainly feel that way. It's everybody has their own unique story in ways that puzzle pieces have come together, but just always that ongoing drive to see where there's gaps, and how not just us, but also our team and different individuals within communities and organizations can come together in an integrated way to help fill those gaps in a variety of ways.
Yeah.
You mentioned it a little bit about resilience. Can you talk about that word a little bit? How you define that for yourself and why you chose that to be the name of your group or your company?
Yeah, I think something that we've really dug a bit more deeply into is an understanding that, well, first of all, resilience is inherent to each one of us in different ways. And God has created us with a innate level of resilience, and then resilience can also be developed. It's impacted by experiences that we go throughout the course of our life, and certainly shaped in those ways. But we've continued to observe, and a lot of our research has identified that when resilience is developed, that actually the impact, and particularly the long-term effect of crisis and critical incidents, is mitigated. And so much of what we do just globally, and by we, I mean kind of the collective we, in looking at crisis response, whether it be from a physical standpoint, medical care, or whether it's emotional, mental, or spiritual, is very reactive. And, as a situation happens, we respond, we provide care. Sometimes we're there for some of the longer term care pieces, but more often that's something where the individual goes back to their family member, their community, and they have those long term care pieces. And what we've seen is that when resilience is developed, and there's various factors that are kind of unpacked in that developing, that individual always impacted by crisis and critical incidents, because we all are, but the longer term effects of that impact are lessened, and their ability to press into really integrated recovery is greatly enhanced. We've kind of narrowed that down to between 7 and 10 factors of resilience, depending on how we're unpacking it for a group or a community. But the core of who we are, our identity, research continues to demonstrate that faith and spirituality, a moral compass, meaning and purpose are core to our resilience. And that's secular and faith-based research that demonstrates the need for an understanding of faith and spirituality, something bigger than ourselves, which informs our moral compass, which determines our meaning and purpose. And, certainly you see that in global healthcare, in particularly medical missions, that there's a core of faith and spirituality or desire to be a part of something bigger than yourself that does drive that decision-making capacity. And that moves from internal to external. There's some resilience factors that speak to things like realistic optimism. Can you acknowledge that things are hard and look forward with hope? Some different ways that creative problem solving come into play. Can you look at a situation and think about different ways that you can care for yourself and others and navigating through that? So when we've seen that those factors are developed, we see that people come out on the other side of these really horrific circumstances in many cases, with the ability to understand and identify how it's impacted them, and then pull some tools out of their toolbox to care for not just themselves, but also their family or their team or their community that has also experienced that. So it becomes a pre-development that directly informs post-care.
Yeah, at its simplest, I would say resilience is just navigating challenges in healthy ways, ways that restore on the back end. And so there's a lot of different terminology that you'll see if you Google resilience, but that's what we found is the most helpful, especially when it comes to conversations around trauma, and the context that we want to work in, which are some of the most difficult in the world.
Resilience also speaks to an integrated component when we live in a disintegrated world with messaging that continues to separate things like physical and psychological. When the reality is, and again, research continues to demonstrate that physical symptoms are deeply connected to psychological, emotional, and spiritual impacts and how that manifests in our body. So resilience, and that term resilience, the development of it, just really sees and works towards restoration and that integration of all four components of who we are.
Yeah, and you really believe that once you go through something traumatizing and you really are able to experience that, the fact that those are not separated things, and how really you are physically feeling and emotionally and psychologically, and how everybody around you is affected as well by those things. So everything you say is right on. How do you guys work? So, like, what are the things, practically speaking, that you do, that you get involved in? Can an individual just say, hey, I just came off the field, or do you try to focus more on people while they're already out there and you're going to them, or are they coming to you? Explain to us a little bit how you practically get involved in some of these situations.
The answer to that is all of those things you said actually happen.
Okay.
So we work on a pre, mid, and post formula when it comes to crisis. So much of our work is done in the preparation side. We found that resilience in itself is a lot of preparation plus adaptability equals resilience. And so there's a ton of work done on the prep side, and that's even with consulting with organizations to create policies and procedures that actually care for their employees. And then it's individual training and equipping, because it's better to be equipped prior to the crisis than to try to be equipped after it comes. There's just a bandwidth difference there. So that's the pre part of that plan. In the midst, then we have a crisis response team that we maintain that can deploy to disasters, and disasters being like the big global ones that make the news, or the individual situations where someone lost someone close to them, someone was involved in a suicide situation, something like that. Those are all disasters, and we tend to say disaster and think earthquake or think war, but for the individual, it's very different. So, but responding in the midst of that, what can we do to help? And the resilience resource is primarily an equipping organization. So anytime we go in to help, we're bringing equipping pieces so that people can also help themselves and their community, understanding that we won't be there most likely long term,
Even in our coaching capacity, which several members of our team do as well. They're certified mental health coaches, but there's an equipping piece in that, because our goal, one of our core values, is empowering the individual to understand the resilience that they already have on board, and their own tools that they have in their toolbox, maybe help them, round those out a little bit better. But it's a strengths-based coaching of helping them to identify the strengths that they already have present and how they can pull those into play.
And then there's aftercare, of course. After something has happened, what's the process that someone wants to be involved in to help their own healing and restore what has been lost through crisis? Because crisis forces us to lose things. That's what is traumatic about them.
A crisis is inherently transformational. It turns your world upside down and inside out, and helping people to make sense of that context and kind of understand what some steps down a path forward could look like. There's some transition pieces that are involved in our post-care. Oftentimes we'll come in and provide care for a team who's had a significant transition, either a leader that has been there for a period of time that is moving on and helping to celebrate what was and look ahead with hope to what could be. Maybe it's more of a crisis transition where maybe there's a loss of a leader, either through a death or through a situation where there was a critical reason to remove that leader from leadership. Those are crisis situations as well, and those have far-reaching impacts. As I know that you guys know well, and the different experiences that you've gone through, including transitions, even transitions from one country to another, brings its own crisis stages and need to understand grief and loss and processing those experiences.
Yeah, I think what you said even is just the it's not always the tsunami that hit, that is crisis. And I think we think of those. So then especially humanitarian aid workers, we're so used to working on this large scale where everything is intense and kind of only Ebola is a real crisis, so that if you do have a personal crisis, it seems not important or smaller, or that you shouldn't be having a hard time or be traumatized by, oh, my leader just changed. I just went to a different field. It's not a big deal. It's not, we always say it's not like it's Ebola, but then we can end up minimizing some of these really traumatic events and not processing the way we should be processing. And I think that happens, and I think maybe Sarah can comment on too. Yeah, the way we minimize what could be a traumatic event to us emotionally, physically, or in any of those and all of those categories, because we're comparing it to these huge things that happen that we're used to being involved in.
Yeah, experiences will be processed one way or the other, whether we choose to allow them to be processed or not. Go ahead, Sarah.
It's going to come out, your emotions. It's just, is it going to come out in a healthy way or in a destructive way? And I think Kelly and I can both attest to both of those at different times in our careers and friendships and things like that. It's going to happen, but it's just, but no, I just love you guys so much and what you're doing. I think it's so needed. And I think it's just maybe in the last, I was on the field for 6 years and came off 2 years ago. And maybe in the last 10 years that I feel like mission agencies have finally realized they need this instead of just this attitude of just minimize things and, oh, it's not that bad, or it's not, but I'm so excited about what you guys are doing and that you guys are getting great responses and, that you are sought after to do the work that you're doing. So I think it's so needed in amongst humanitarian aid workers and missionaries alike. So thank you for what you guys are doing.
It's a gift to see the conversation become more normalized and to see different contexts start to implement some of these tools. And, we're really passionate about people thriving in their work and understanding the value of who they've been created to be and the ways that that God has uniquely put them together that can come into play and to meet the world's need, but not in a way that destroys themselves in the process. second greatest commandment is to love others as you love yourself. And so it's an integrated piece that recognizes that when we're thriving in the work that we do, that's going to overflow into our care for people. And it's going to create a higher level of compassion and creativity in how we connect with others. And they see that life that's in us. It doesn't minimize our experiences. It actually acknowledges that, gosh, I'm a human being and I'm impacted too. And because of that, the commonality of my impact resonates with the commonality of your impact. And we could be in this together. Like neither of us is alone. And it just helps to emphasize that sense of community and connection. That is really what we were made for. The past year or so, we've been heavily involved in Eastern Europe through the war in Ukraine, and then more recently in Turkey and Syria, and some touch points in Lebanon with the earthquake there, and then even more recently with the outbreak of war in Sudan. But interestingly enough, when we're caring for people and providing resources, certainly there's the flashpoint of crisis. But typically we move on from that pretty quickly in our conversation. And it's what's desired to be talked about is what they were experiencing before. It was the different circumstances and hardships that were present before this thing overlapped everything else and brought some maybe more critical symptoms to the surface. So it's integrated into our day-to-day life, and the crises kind of bring some things to the forefront in maybe a way that helps us actually acknowledge their presence. But it's that integrated relational component that does form the foundation for ongoing resilience. And we talk a lot about that when we provide coaching and care as well.
I love that to hear you guys talk about it, because I think I'm maybe saying what Kelly was getting ready to say. We wish we would have had this to kind of tap into when we were on the field. I think we ended up suffering a lot of years because we didn't know what to do or where to go when things happened. And we were, a medical missions field that typically was like, it is what it is, and just keep working and keep getting up. But, and I think it spurred me on, like I just finished up some graduate work in disaster healthcare, thinking I was going to go down the programming route, which I did a lot of, but I ended up more focusing on what exactly you're talking about, resilience and moral injury and how to better help the missionary and the humanitarian aid work. That's where my study ended up culminating at, which just became a huge passion of mine. So I love what you guys are doing. And actually, I would love for you to talk a little bit about moral injury and how you address that, or how you talk about people with that. And I think that's such a huge piece on the humanitarian aid front, as well as the medical mission front. Kelly and I and some of the other doctors used to talk about that towards the end of our time, just what that meant for us and how just recognizing it and naming it, I think went a long way to more, not normalize it, but make it more of a conversation instead of there's just something wrong with them, or there's something, they can't handle the job, or whatever you wanted to say. But if you could speak about that for a minute.
So moral injury is one of these, it's a term that was coined after Vietnam to describe what some of the military personnel were facing coming back, and the conflicting emotions that came with being either commanded or voluntarily committing acts that violated their own conscience. That's in a nutshell what moral injury is. It's a wound to the soul or that violates your moral compass. For medical personnel have some weird beliefs that come out usually after the fact in
we say that in the kindness.
We
from our experiences,
we're self-aware. We can admit that that's true.
Medical personnel
in more
are
ways
wonderful.
than you know.
Wonderful, amazing people.
Yes, but one of the things that results often in a moral injurious event for medical personnel is this idea that I have spent my money, my life, getting an education in order to save people from physical wounds, from physical harm, from sickness, from all of these things. And all of my energy, all of my finances has gone to this. Now I'm in a situation where it doesn't matter how much I commit to it, I can't save everybody. And we've even dealt with a few medical personnel on the field who have been new to the field, maybe started in with great ideas of what they were doing. Maybe they were, well, the one I'm thinking of was a surgeon who was the only surgeon for miles for an entire region, and basically came to us with the attitude of, if I rest, people die, because I'm the only one that has the equipping to handle what people are bringing. And and people can see the logic in that. Yes, you have the tools that people need. However, there's a theological problem that says who's actually in charge of who lives and who dies. And whether you work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or a normal shift with regular rhythms of rest, people will still die in your community. And you're not responsible for their life and death. Now, the other part of moral injury that we see in healthcare workers are those decisions that were made, because you're making life and death decisions, and looking at some of those and go, and sometimes the voice in their head is saying, I should have done something different. Other times it's saying, I don't know what I could have done different. But there's a longing that what happened shouldn't have happened, and wrestling with that. And that's kind of I don't know, what would you say? Would you say there's other common moral injurious events for medical personnel that you've seen?
I think one of the challenges with moral injury is that it's something that's integrated into your what we talked about, that core of identity with faith and spirituality and moral compass. It's integrated into your overall view of your faith and spirituality, and the role that you see God playing in that. Your relationship with God will directly determine how you how your moral compass is informed, and then the potential for moral wounds or soul wounds that could occur. And if you really wrestle with a perspective that says, if I do good things will happen, they're honestly at a higher risk for that occurring, because we do live in a broken, disintegrated world where horrible, evil things do happen, and they happen outside of our control. And wrestling with those bigger questions of how could a good God allow these things to occur is some of that root of that soul wound. And because of that, research is continuing to demonstrate that care for moral injury requires a theological and psychological intersection. And we've often, again, tried to disintegrate those things and gone, oh, you just need to go see a counselor or a therapist, or this is rooted in your faith. If you just had enough faith, you would be able to get past this point. When the reality is there's big questions we don't have answers for. And we have to be willing to sit in tension of, I don't know. And that's a struggle. It's a struggle for many people. But when we look at it from a whole perspective, a body, mind, heart, and soul, emotional, psychological, spiritual, physical, and a restorative wholeness view, then instead of asking the questions of how could a good God, we start to ask the questions of what does restoration in this situation look like? I can't change the reality of the situation, but what does restoration here? What could that be? And what steps can I take both for myself and for others in the midst of this situation to move towards restoration? And part of that is a posture towards God, and part of your relationship being defined with God. It's also a key part of it is your relationship with yourself, your understanding of your identity and who God made you to be, and your relationship with community. COVID, of course, is huge for health workers, and coming alongside health workers in several different contexts, including a COVID field hospital, the shifting environment and messaging was so tough because so much was unknown. You're doing the best you could with what you knew in the moment, and 24 hours later, it would turn upside down and protocols were completely different, and now we're treating this way. And of course, the mindset went, well, gosh, if I'd known then what I knew now, how many more lives could I have saved? And even towards, kind of as we've tracked more recently, often the demonization of healthcare workers. And you're actually causing harm to my family by putting these protocols into place or by demanding these steps occur. And then healthcare workers dealing with, am I bringing harm home to my own family by carrying this virus from my workplace into my home? And then if a family member did get sick, gosh, like, is that my fault? I caused that by doing what I thought was right to show up to work every day. And then I brought this sickness into what should be my sanctuary, my place where I can recover from the stressors of every day. So yeah, it's been a very cumulative effect over the past couple of years on top of what people were already experiencing.
Sure. And then when you talk about all of those things on the individual level, especially when you're talking about a global health field or something, everybody's going through that in their own different way. And then we're all supposed to work together, to form a team. And I mean, obviously it's a recipe for, just no wonder why often it's not just an individual level, or even if you're called to work on an individual level, it has to be a team level, because if the entire team doesn't understand these things, well, then someone is labeled as having a character flaw, and they maybe should have never been on the field in the first place. Or all of a sudden we end up defining people and things and experiences in the way we handle things, or from our own past experiences, not their past experiences. And we can end up demonizing each other. And, well, why don't you have a moral injury from this? It injures me. Doesn't mean that what kind of person are you that doesn't hurt you, and I mean, all sorts of ways that we end up processing unhealthily as these things are occurring to all of us at the same time. Yeah. What direction?
I was just going to say, that's
Go
one of
ahead,
the values
Josie.
we've really seen in that preparatory piece is that it helps to establish a commonality of language around these things so that the team is on the same page. When you're talking about trauma, you're recognizing that trauma is not connected to an event. It is an individual or a community, because communities can experience trauma as well at a communal level. It's their reaction to the event. And because we all have different experiences and things that resilience levels, things that have shaped us through our life, our reactions are understandably going to be different. And so that comparison piece then
it's never helpful.
Is mitigated because it allows you to go, well, of course you have a different reaction. You've got a totally different background than I do and different resilience levels that I do. And so how about we just be present in each other's reactions together and just give grace and space for that to happen and see what restoration can look like for each one of us as we come alongside each other.
Yeah, the common terms is huge. I mean, in my own recovery or trauma recovery journey, I remember in a counseling session, they did an education piece first, like PowerPoints on some of these things that were happening. And I remember when I first saw the term secondary trauma across the board and them listing things, and I broke down right there at the table, being like, oh my gosh, that's me. There I am on the screen. But the first thing I kind of said to myself is, why didn't somebody tell me that? Like, why didn't someone just say I was experiencing secondary trauma? But they didn't, right? My field didn't have a term for that, or didn't know that, or didn't know, but it was so healing at the same, like instantly sad to me that, well, I went that long experiencing that without help. But at the same time, like freeing that, like, oh my gosh, there's a name for this, and because it really felt that there was a pathway forward then to be like, oh, people do know what's going on, so there must be a path forward. And so I think that common vocabulary on a field is huge.
Yeah, I think it takes out the something's wrong with me mindset, because all of a sudden now there's a definition that says, actually, well, yes, something's wrong with you, but like this is what's wrong. And like, there's steps to move forward other than just being like, instead of like, you're just ambiguously traumatized and like, there's nothing we can do about it. But like, I do agree with Kelly, and like, I felt the same way. And then like also the word that I think came out when I finally started realizing how I was traumatized and how to move forward was I felt vindicated that there was a word for it, because I'd been led to believe that there was just something wrong with me, that there was no way to move. Like it was my fault that I wasn't getting better, that it was all these things. But it was like, oh gosh, well now I feel better, even though I'm hurting, because other people feel this way too, and there's a way to move in a different direction. So anyway, all that to say, you guys are such wise people, and we love what you do very much. And we wish we'd have known you before, but we know that you're helping a ton of people and will continue to help a ton of people in the future. So can you touch a little bit on where you guys are working within the constraints of security that you can tell us, and what's on the horizon for you guys?
Sure.
Well, I think I'm just to kind of wrap that last section. It's important for your audience, I think, to hear that nobody that does this kind of work does not experience some kind of secondary stress and secondary trauma. It comes with the job. And so the only way to be resilient through it is to know that it's coming, to prepare for your reactions to it, and to recognize them when they happen. But it's going to happen. It's just part of the world we live in and part of the job that we've chosen to do. So it's completely normal.
And that experiencing doesn't mean that you shouldn't have that job, and I think making sure it's like, I was traumatized, therefore maybe I wasn't meant for this work. It's saying, oh no, like, and I think a lot of people end up leaving the work because of their own expectations or outside expectations on them. You shouldn't, then maybe you're just not tough enough to be called to this area or something like that. So I think that's
we
great.
actually find the opposite to be true, that the people who try to maintain the mindset that nothing affects them, that they can cope with everything, are the people who become rigid and then eventually break in some pretty spectacular ways. It's actually the people who say, wow, this has an impact on me because God created me to be a compassionate, connected human being with feelings that are normal and okay. And that's actually what helps me connect with other human beings at a deeper relational level, whether I'm doing a simple physical or whether I'm doing brain surgery. If we disconnect from the humanity within ourselves, we will dehumanize other people. So it's actually vitally necessary in the course of this work to recognize how we're human and to fully experience that at integrated levels so that we can connect with the integration and value of other human beings. It makes you better at your work. And it's intriguing to come across those, particularly in the aid sector and oftentimes in the mission sector. And I think so much of this culture is taught even throughout medical school. Don't let anything affect you. And that just means you can't hack it if you have show any emotion whatsoever. And it's just such an upside down, inside out way of seeing the world that really causes some pretty significant long-term impacts. But yeah, to circle around to where we're working right now, we just got back from Ukraine a couple of weeks ago. And spent some time with a community that, just a group of people actually, that is with one particular organization. And then they've launched a refugee care center. So they have leaders from different communities that have come to Western Ukraine for safety, further away from the fight in Eastern Ukraine.
And Ukraine sounds really sexy right now because it's been on the news and everybody knows there's a war. When we say we went to Ukraine, we were far away from the front, and that will be typical of our responses. We're not necessarily the ones that have the best equipping to go into the front lines and provide what those guys need. Matter of fact, we probably cause a problem because they're more worried about protecting us than they are doing the job that's in front of them. So our first, just out of the first responder world, the first rule is don't cause any further harm or further distress. So we're going, no matter where we respond, we're going to respond from the periphery. And if we go in, it's going to be at the request of someone who has mitigated the circumstances for themselves as well as for us,
in ways that are most beneficial for the community.
Yeah.
And that said, there is some pretty significant research in the past couple of years about the value of, it's actually a medical term too, but the value of the golden hours, that the first 24 to 48 hours of care, and realizing that applies in a psychological and emotional capacity as well. And so when things like psychological first aid or mental health crisis care tools can be provided within that first 24 to 48 hours after a crisis or critical incident, long-term effects can be significantly mitigated, including potentially the prevention of things like PTSD or moral injury. So really working to help equip leaders and communities to have those tools in their toolbox, certainly can come in and can come alongside them in providing that directly after a crisis or disaster, but then also helping them to have those tools on hand so that as they're present in the front lines of response, they've already got that on board. They already feel equipped to provide holistic crisis care. And we often circle back around to that. There's times that we're providing physical first aid ourselves because that's a part of crisis care. If somebody doesn't feel safe, if they're dealing with a medical issue, if they're dealing with a wound, they're not going to sit there and talk to you about their emotional, psychological, spiritual needs.
I'm bleeding here.
Not as helpful if they're bleeding out. Yeah.
We really advocate for people to have that perspective of that holistic piece. And because of that, a core part of our organization is collaboration, being widely connected to a variety of organizations and communities that can provide a spectrum of care. If somebody needs housing, if they're at fear for them and their children's safety, we want to be able to connect them to an organization that does that. We don't have to do that, but we can help provide that for them. And once that load is taken off of their mind, then we can be present in talking about maybe some of the emotional, psychological, even spiritual things that they might be wrestling with.
That's great. And on that vein, how do you tell us ways that people can try to connect with you all if they're an organization and they want to be a connection point, knowing that they have housing for people or whatever it might be, or how can people get involved in what you're doing or just follow what you're doing?
Sure. So we, as all organizations must in this day and age, have an online presence. You can check out our website at theresilienceresource.org. We also have a social media presence on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So some of our information is posted there, different projects that we're involved in, different needs. And we have a bi-monthly resource report that actually contains different links for current research, things that are trending in the holistic crisis care world, as well as some brief updates about some activities that we might have just recently been involved in or planning for. We've also just launched a couple of 2.5-day trainings called Compassionate Care in Crisis. So if leaders or communities, churches are desiring to become more trauma-informed, trauma-equipped, those trainings would be great to check out. We have one in a couple of weeks in Denver, and then another one at the end of June, early July in Minneapolis. And people can find more information about that on our website as well. We're also a nonprofit, so we have a small and engaged donor team, but we also foundationally believe that those that are experiencing the flashpoint of crisis or critical incident should not ever be approached with any kind of financial request. So we build a scholarship fund for training, as well as a fund that allows for the provision of care in the midst of crisis at no charge to people who are experiencing that crisis, including even some longer term sessions of mental health coaching and support, whether that's remote or in person.
So we actually won't respond if there's not a sponsor for the response. So whether that's private donations or organizations that get together, we will not charge people for the care that they need when they're on the front lines. And again, that's the don't exacerbate the problem mindset. So when something happens, we start to collect either from the donor pool or from organizations. How can we collaborate together to coordinate a response here? But I would say the best way to get involved with what TR is doing is get equipped yourself to care for yourself and your community, because that's the goal. We can't be there in the golden hours. We never can. It'll take us 24 hours to get to Ukraine if a new thing happens. So people in the community have to be equipped to do that, and your community is no different. When we're in Southwest Florida, and when Hurricane Ian hit our community, it was us in our community that had the tools during the golden hours when it was most vital. And that's going to be you and your community as well.
That's great. Such good words. So thank you guys so much for joining us. We really just love what you do. Appreciate your time. Thank you for all the amazing information and for being a guest on our podcast today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much for having us. It just is always a joy to spend time with the two of you, and just love our conversation. Love the work that you guys are doing as well. I know that you also are working to equip communities in various capacities and hospitals, and just excited to see what's to come in the days ahead for you.
Awesome. Thank you. Please check out the resilienceresource.org. Please donate to them if you love what they're doing or you've been impacted by them, or someone you know is in need of their services. And we look forward to next time.
Hey, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the Christian Health Service Corps Iron to Silver podcast. You know, Christian Health Service Corps, we are passionate about bringing quality health care to the world's poorest places. If you share our passion, we'd love to hear from you. Our website is www.healthservicecorps.org. Thank you again for joining us this week.